Welcome back to Tipping Point. I'm your host, Kara McKinney. Now, you may remember how Joe Biden rushed to the site of a collapsed bridge in Pittsburgh on Friday last week. Predictably, he used the visit as an opportunity to plug the $1 trillion infrastructure bill he signed back in November. But new reports have since uncovered that the Forbes Avenue Bridge was not listed among the projects targeted for federal funding in Pennsylvania's 2021 Transportation Improvement Program. Now, at the same time, Biden also used the occasion to drop some trivia about Pittsburgh and its bridges on an absolutely riveted public. I'm obviously being facetious here. And apparently, breaking with the more progressive voices in his party, he promised more money to America's police officers. But like federal infrastructure money, it's likely not going within 100 miles of where it's actually needed most. In fact, the Biden Department of Injustice has been awarding crime reduction grants to Soros-funded organizations that specialize in anti-cop reforms. It's a way for Biden and Democrats to talk out of both sides of their mouths to pretend they're addressing rising levels of crime while actually pouring gasoline all over that fire. So anyways, here's the empty suit himself.
I've been coming to Pittsburgh a long time, and as a former Pennsylvanian. But I didn't realize there are literally more bridges in Pittsburgh than any other city in the world. You know, more than in Venice. I knew there were a lot of bridges. I had no idea that. And they're gonna fix them all. Not a joke. This is going to be a gigantic change, and there's 43,000 nationwide. And we're spending the money. And by the way, we're going to give you guys more money too, cops.
Here with us now to discuss is biostatistician and founder of JunkScience.com, Steve Milloy. Thanks for being here tonight, Steve.
Hey, Kara, thanks for having me.
All right, so kind of strange that out of about $49 million in federal funds allotted for local bridges already in Pennsylvania before Biden's $1 trillion infrastructure plan, the one that collapsed wasn't on the list to receive money for repairs despite its long-standing issues. Do you think this highlights how often building projects often get derailed by government corruption?
Yeah, ever since this infrastructure bill passed before, I was saying that this money is not going to be used to rebuild infrastructure so much as it's going to be spent by the Biden administration to prop up its friends, to pay off its friends, to keep it in power. And that, unfortunately, happens too often with, like infrastructure money when we just, give it to Congress in a giant pot like this. Republicans think that it's going to be well spent, and it's not. It's going to be spent by the administration to the extent possible. And unless things are earmarked in that bill, it's going to be doled out to the administration's friends for the administration's benefit. And, that is not what everyone has signed up for.
So you're telling me when Biden went out there, we saw last week, and he said that he's going to fix all the bridges, that he was just blowing smoke?
Well, it's not possible. First off, that bridge doesn't need to be fixed anymore. That bridge needs to be rebuilt. If there's 40,000 bridges and there's only $40 billion, that's $1 million per bridge. That's probably not enough to fix very many. So, the infrastructure was just a cynical label put on that bill. This was really just a giant campaign contribution from taxpayers to the Biden administration.
Now, thankfully, when that bridge collapsed in Pennsylvania, there were no deaths, thankfully, for that. I believe about 10 or so people were injured, but again, nothing too serious. So we are thankful for that. But one thing I know we definitely do need more of in this nation is roads, highways. I know in Southern California, that's a major problem for all of us here. The roads always seem like they're under construction for repairs, but nothing ever seems to get fixed. There's potholes everywhere, never enough road space for everybody, a lot of, traffic jams and everything else. And so, of course, interestingly enough, I was looking a little bit into the infrastructure bill that passed last year, and it seems it'll make it even harder for highways to be built.
Well, what's going to make things harder is that, once again, the Biden administration has a lot of discretion in how this money is spent. And all the money that is spent on federal projects needs to go through the National Environmental Policy Act, which gives the administration more leverage in how it's spent. And if it actually is spent, it allows environmental groups to sue if they're unhappy with projects. I read today that the Biden administration secretly doesn't really want to build any more roads, so they're going to make reviews more difficult under the National Environmental Policy Act. I really don't see things improving anytime soon under this administration. I mean, just look at what they've done to our borders, to our schools, to, the problem with, drugs pouring in over the border. they're making things worse in our country. And I'm afraid that, although Republicans helped Biden spend this $1.2 trillion on infrastructure, very little of it is going to do any good to anybody.
I think when it comes to infrastructure, making it more difficult for all of us to drive our cars normally. And of course, with the rising gas prices and everything else, I think a lot of it's because they're trying to push us off of fossil fuels, move us into cities and reliant upon public transportation. I think that's perhaps what's going on here. And it's interesting that you actually had a story that you were showing on social media that just kind of blew my mind about what's going on in Yonkers, about how expensive some of this, supposed green energy is really costing people. Talk to us about that.
Right. So residents of Yonkers got, in the mail, I guess, last week or recently, a piece of mail that looked like something from, Public Service Clearinghouse, something that, you would just throw in the trash. But for those people who opened it, they found out that unless they, signed on the line and objected to being objected to what they were being told, they were going to be signed up for a green energy plan that would raise their electricity bill by 19%. So, if you didn't if you threw away what looked like junk mail, your electricity bill is going up by 19% in Yonkers.
I mean, and this was supposed to be, better for all of us, better for the environment, better for our pocketbooks. And of course, none of that ends up being true. And also, I mean, and talking about this as well, making it more expensive here at home, really kneecapping ourselves when it comes to energy production. And of course, we always talk a lot about how this helps China and even Russia in some instances. And of course, the other OPEC nations in the Middle East, it helps them and it disadvantages us here at home. I mean, same thing. Biden's always paying off his, foreign buddies who also give him a lot of leg up in our elections with money and everything else in support. So we see what's going on here. But you also had something very interesting about Gina Raimondo, Biden's other climate czar, in addition to John Kerry, and talk about, China's role in all this. Explain for us that.
Well, so Gina McCarthy had a very high-level White House meeting last week, and she admitted there that the Biden climate agenda depends on China. Of course, this is something that people like me have been saying for a very long time now. All this green technology depends on rare earth minerals, either mined or processed in China. A lot of chips come from China. A lot of technology comes from China. And so the more we just, require various, green technologies, the more we're going to be dependent on China. All these Build Back Better requires that, our electricity grid go basically all wind and solar, or 80% wind and solar by 2030. But that would make our electricity grid 100% dependent on China, because none of that technology is made here, or an insignificant amount is made here. Most of it comes from China, so we're just getting ourselves hooked on Chinese green tech junk.
And thank you for correcting me there. I meant Gina McCarthy, but I guess my mind slipped on that one. Thank you for correcting the record on that, Steve. Always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And after the break, while our infrastructure